It's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Isra Kassi, who is the co-founder of Tape Collective and has a background in events and venue management with a focus on audience development and building partnerships. Now, Isra is going to give you far more insight than I'd be able to about Tape. But to summarise here, Tape is a curatorial collective which works across production, distribution and exhibition, challenging traditional ways of filmmaking and distribution and looking to demystify the industry for marginalised voices. Isra is going to give you some insight into her work today in relation to decolonisation in particular. So, thank you, Isra.
Thank you. Hello everyone, thanks for being here. It's really nice to meet you all, and I hope we get to chat a bit more afterwards. And thanks to James for having me. So in terms of discussing Tape and what we do, I thought I would sort of run through how we started, our aims and intentions, if we stay true to those aims and intentions, or if we lost our way on the way, where we're at the moment, and just do case studies in terms of, I think, some of the more important work we've done when it comes to decolonization. I also think it makes sense if you have any questions or question something throughout, feel free to put your hand up at any point. There's also going to be some questions for you. I don't know how much back and forth you want to do, but there will be some questions for you to sort of consider. So yeah. So just to sort of let you know in terms of how we started, our first screen was actually the Wild Party in a cafe in Peckham, which I think for people who know the kind of things we do, might find it not sort of in line with the work that we curate. But we are supposed to archive films that don't require a license fee. So that was really what happened 10 years ago. And yeah, so Angela and I co-founded Tape. We started off as a very South London-based collective. It was all about Peckham, Brooks and Stratton. We met as young Barking programmers back when we were young. And it was, I don't know if you know about the program, but it's this curatorial program that offers free workshops and training to young aspiring programmers who are not already on the trajectory to become programmers. And then at the end of it, they're given 2 days to program a festival. We were part of the first cohort, so back then it was actually 3 years, which is a really long time to dedicate to something. Because it's unpaid and because it's quite repetitive because you get new things throughout the year. But anyways, that's how we met, and in a sort of classic cinephile way, we both, on our commute to South London from Barbican, were like, oh my god, I want to open a cinema, which I think a lot of people say, everyone must have run a cinema, maybe not everyone, but a lot of people have this passion dream to run a cinema. And we were talking about that. At the time, I had just sort of left self-employment, I had no interest in it. And so I said to Angie, let's just start small. Let's just start with screenings and then see how it goes. So that was really how sort of Tape became Tape. And we have now taken over the Barbican programs actually, so we're now facilitating workshops, which is quite nice to be able to do that. As we were part of the first cohort, and they just delivered their first festival about 2 weeks ago. So in terms of how that developed from let's open a cinema to right, we're going to have a collective of 2 people, whatever that means, is that we immediately looked at the work we were doing at the Barbican and thinking how it still wasn't enough. You'll find that sort of greed and this idea of being able to do everything because we can is really it's a huge part of Tape's work in terms of questioning who's allowed to do what. And so when you're working as part of an institution like that, with your program for learning and that exchange of learning and opportunities and budget, it's a bit skewed in terms of what it actually takes to program and what actually needs to put on events. So we looked at the opportunities that were given to us, which is tech team, staff, booking system, someone to pay the budget, someone to cover the license fees, and the contacts to be able to invite talent, and question whether that's something that we want to do. And I do remember the moment about 10 years ago, being like, this is great, but it's not necessarily what we want to do because yeah, it is just, it's not really a realistic portrayal of what grassroots programming is or what it's like to actually starting off as programming. Even then, our sort of, the reasons why we found it was a response to the lack of representation. Now we'll talk a bit more about phrasing and words, but at the time that's what it felt like. And obviously this has evolved a bit, but it still stays true in terms of, we knew that there were films. We were sort of knowledgeable enough in cinema and films to know that the films that represented us or that we saw ourselves in, that we were interested in, were out there. The flaw was the UK distribution market. I don't know how much you know about the UK distribution market and how it works. It was to us a complete mystery, but we were angry with someone. We didn't really know who to be angry with. We were angry with someone in terms of, why has this film been premiered here and there, directed by this person, talking about something that we're really interested in, not being released in cinemas in the UK. That's something that we sort of continue looking at and questioning and wanting to change. And also, that sort of, we'll talk a bit more about distribution later, but I just want to say that in terms of that mission it was something on my mind from the very beginning. How does distribution work? Why do I have to pay £600 for a license fee because no one in the UK is streaming it? What does it mean? And it actually took us a really long time to get to distribution. So we've made it now, sort of, but it took a very, very long time, and that's because of this lack of transparency, complete lack of transparency in terms of how things work, why they work, and how production, distribution, and exhibition can work together. Another thing I should add is that when we met, Angie was an intern somewhere, and I was working as like an events coordinator at cinema. That to us was that we made it. So at the same time, we were sort of learning about programming for the Burlington and doing tape. And as we've sort of grown in our respective roles, so has tape. And so our background is not in academia, we're not academics at all. We're not very clever people at all. Like, we're just sort of, we have screened some very silly films, and for us it's always about the experience. So our aims and intentions haven't changed in 10 years. Again, with language, they might be rephrased. So I named the session Could Be Called Classics, which is something that Angie said in one of our first meetings. She said, oh, you know, wouldn't it be cool if it was like this sort of like could be called classics, which then brings it down to who decides what called classic is. Who decides what classic is? And all we knew in that moment, that all we could do is that it could be. So this could have been a cult classic if certain powers allowed it, if cinema was decolonized, if, you know, films by women were appreciated, all of these kind of things that we really started questioning in terms of could be called classics of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Another thing is to work with strong themes. So we like to sort of bundle things up together in terms of how do you have a conversation around this, what does this actually mean? As opposed to, I mean, films are great, and a lot of the films we program are one-offs or films that are rare, but there needs to be more than just the film. And it's not enough to sort of talk about that film, start creating experience and conversation around it. Variety is always key. So because our experience has been pigeonholed, both in the sense of what films we should be able to like and what films we should be able to work with, we also just want to sort of keep people on their toes in terms of actually this is what we're interested in right now. And that's something that sort of has kept tape going in terms of what our interests are. It doesn't, this is why sort of diversified cinema doesn't really work, because the interests are, yeah, it's sort of, we don't want to limit ourselves in terms of what we're putting out there. So on language, because language is always evolving, as we know, I want to be transparent and say that I don't think we've ever said that our work is decolonising, or that's not really something that we've sort of expressed. Instead, things that we have, you know, said, especially when we talk about representation on screen, it was underrepresented voices, a non-white perspective, you know, shifting the gaze from what, mixed heritage storytelling, which I'll tell you a bit more about as well, and marginalised filmmakers. So these are all sort of terms that we would probably use more often. The thing with decolonise is that this one time I had an employer who wanted us to be viewed as who wanted us to be viewed as non-hierarchical. And I said, well, we're not non-hierarchical because you're a manager, a company manager, and you're on twice as much as everyone else. And they said, well, de-hierarchical. So this whole idea of D being like a de-escalation is what decolonise feels like to me. So, sort of in terms of what can we actually do and what can we actually shift, because as sad and hopeless it might sound, we can only do so much. And we would need to decolonise spaces, funding, who we work with, who the decision makers are, how films are distributed, how films are produced, for us to be able to even claim that. For now, all we can do is reject certain elements and sort of try to do what we want to do in terms of trying to experiment with things and being playful. But then I do use the word. So decolonising, which is a lot of things we do, is audiences. It's always about the audience. So I started off with seeing ourselves as the audience, and what, in a quite selfish way, in terms of like, okay, what do we want to experience? What do we want to see? Angie and I would have these sort of semi-lucid dreams of something we watched when we were young, growing up with siblings that were older than us, and trying to sort of, put the puzzle together in terms of these fragments of childhood memories. And then obviously as we start growing a bit more, the conversation is then about having conversations with audiences. What do you actually want to see? And completely, again, rejecting this idea that you can figure out what people want, because I think that's really, really dangerous. And the higher up you get, the more commercial you get in cinema exhibition and distribution, the scarier the assumptions are. And I'm all for sort of data and research and all these things, but to make assumptions before you even put a film out in terms of who's going to be interested in it and who's going to watch it and who no one cares, is sort of something that we're trying to, again, reject. Okay, so another thing in terms of words and how we use words is that there's a massive difference between anti-racist activity or anti-racism and decolonising, because there's something about in terms of going beyond the work is that you're putting out and going beyond the conversation you're having with the work you're putting out. And actually, I didn't want to say like decolonise audiences, but there's something about being able to be in a room with people who understand what you're watching in a level that you would always have to explain to someone else that doesn't have a lived experience. So even if you are, not from a certain community and you're programming something, who are you programming for? I think is a massive, massive issue. And there's something about, BLM's come up this year, or even trying to have sort of diversity, inclusion matters, representation matters, all those things are sort of phrases we've been hearing, but who is it for? And I think one example as well, because the BFS come up and it's going to come up again. But in terms of, I don't know how many of you have done like diversity standard form? A diversity standards form? No. Yeah? So if you get, funding from the BFI, or anyone really, but there's a very British way of assessing how diverse you are. And the problem with how it gets assessed is that it's like from who? So I'd have to, so take as an all-women team, all from mixed heritage backgrounds and different sort of social and economic backgrounds. The way that I have to talk about our team and myself in these applications to prove that what we're doing is diverse enough is problematic. Like even the sort of, I've reported it, I've tried to say this doesn't work for me because I'm not someone who's just trying to get the money from you to sort of groundwash their activity. I'm actually trying to just do something for an audience here, and that sort of isn't really being understood. So again, who's the audience? If we look at distribution, our distributors, it's becoming more diverse now, I'd say, but there was definitely a period where every major independent distributor was white-led and white-owned. When we get excited about the films that they pick up in terms of representation, what is the ownership that film has, and what is the ownership that those distributors have over that film, and who is it for? Also, in which spaces do these films get screened? So one of our first things in terms of the decisions we made when we started off was about what is the feeling you get when you walk into a space like this, where cinema screen, and what works and what doesn't work. There's a sort of idea of enter, watch, leave, and there's something about decorum and behaviour and the sort of things that we're now trying to deconstruct in terms of offering live screenings or more accessible screenings. But in actual fact, if we just screened it in a more alternative space, so our first screening was in a cafe, we can then take over the space, do what we need to it, do what we want with it, and so that there's no sort of, we're not dragging with us the rules of how cinema should be experienced. And how does the audience perceive the film? So like, this goes back in terms of like lived experience. Again, how much can you avoid explaining things? And this is something that is still sort of incredibly like debate, I feel. Has anyone seen Dogs and Days? It's like at the Royal Courts. No? So it's this play that was at Fringe, and it's by Somali women, written by Somali women. It's like the Breakfast Club for Somali community. So it takes place in a mosque for women on a Saturday. They've got detention. I went to watch it and sort of, I'm Muslim, I'm not Somali, so I understood some of the Muslim references. I didn't understand all the Somali references. And what's interesting is leaving that space and going, you know what, this would have been the same as if I'd watched something that is more Western, that is like Christian focused, but it's more about how often we've been exposed to that. As the actual fact is, there were people in that room who wouldn't have understood the Somali references or the Muslim references, but there's some people having to endure that experience because the creators, artists are putting it out. And I think that's sort of something that we can question in terms of how people perceive films. What is it that we are making people endure because we have not been flexible enough, we have not been able to sort of be more assertive in our curation and distribution in the UK. And again, what lived experience may shift their interpretation or appreciation for the film, which I think what comes down with this idea of representation is often relating to what can you relate to, how does it feel, which makes things so much more personal. And I want to talk about that here, because what happened was that Andrew and I, when we started curating, and we do call it curating actually. So when we started curating, we found that a lot of our interests were to do with cultural identity, so mixed heritage experience, dual identity. Andrew is British Nigerian, and I'm Iraqi, but I grew up in Sweden. So I was quite naive when I moved to London, thinking that everyone just fit in here and everyone was good and everyone got along. And in my head, I thought, I suppose, that Sweden was a problem in terms of Islamophobic and anti-immigration rhetoric and all those kind of things, and London is fine. Turns out that's not the case, and I think when we're looking at things like sort of this idea of we're trying to be more specific in terms of where people come from, right? We're trying to move away from the BAME and the all Asian, all those kind of terms that insinuates that people are, it's all the same somewhere else. Which is then why it's a bit confusing that actually Andrew and I bonded over this, because what it ended up being was, it wasn't about where we were from, it wasn't about, it wasn't a cultural similarity, it's about the experience. This is something that we sort of referred to in terms of othering and belonging. So all of the films that we started screening were feature films that were not distributed in the UK, but had something to say about culture shocks, melting pots. So this is Window Horses. We did a little Becoming Zlatan, which is huge for me, because I thought it was a great representation of being a migrant in Sweden. And all of these are like one-off screenings. And then eventually we realised actually this is probably the biggest season that we want to do, which is called Where Are You From? But Where Are You From was quite big for us, it still is, it's something that continues. So it's important to sort of note that we worked on it for a really long time in our heads. We wanted to do something called Where Are You From? But we knew that we didn't have the space, the resources, the capacity to actually deliver it the way we wanted. Fast forward, so all those kind of films that we'd done before were sort of one-off screenings, or it was sort of aiming to get to here. This is where we wanted to get. And what happened was that I was living 2020, around COVID time. I was leaving a job as a cinema programmer, and I bumped into someone at some drinks or something. And I said, oh, if I want to put on a season of the Big Five, how would I do that? And he gave me the email. And it turns out that person was like a really big shot in film. But this is why it's really great to like not feel like you have to worship anyone or look after anyone, because I just didn't know who he was, and I just wanted to put on my season. And we were put in touch with a lovely, lovely person who really took the time to work with us on this. So if you know about the BFI seasons, but it's like 12 films, 1 month. Now they had some guilt in terms of 2020, in terms of things that they were trying to change. So in addition to a full cinema season, they also offered a budget to create things online. So it's like they want like a digital curation. And so, going back to why I can't use the phrase decolonize, is because we would not be where we are without public funding and funding applications. That we receive the funding based on how we can explain something to someone, based on how they understand it, not how we want to express it. We have this great season, and I felt like it's really important to also say that Where Are You From is like an ongoing thing. It was not just a season that would then disappear. It's really important for us to continue it. So we divided Where Are You From into 3 strands. And the great thing about this is that it's all about, it was asking people to get very personal, because a lot of these stories about othering and belonging and being third culture kids and feeling out of place and all of these terrible things that you may experience as a person with dual identity, was that we're really relying on filmmakers sharing their work with us, because the stories that we were looking for wasn't just about the story on screen, it's about who's telling the story, which I think, again, is something that we completely forget about in film. So everything that we programmed, everyone we spoke to, was about someone who completely identified with this. So one of the things that we did with this massive budget was we really tried to sort of, I think what I should say is like, the way we from was for people that understood what it was. We were not there to sort of educate or explain or try to sort of get anyone to like us because of our lived experience. It was all about, hey, there's this sentence that people who understand what it feels like will be able to respond to, and the response was amazing. We did all sorts. We listened to music, we commissioned essays, we commissioned a zine, with all sorts of things tied together this idea of mixed heritage experience and dual identity. So the 3 things we looked at, was mother tongue, so all about losing language, language barriers, also names and labels. So there was a sort of wider conversation about mispronouncing names, which still lingers when people are like, how do I say your name? Actually, in a way it doesn't matter, because you're not going to be able to say it. So there's an ongoing thing in terms of like, how do you say this and how do you say that, And then the third one is the good immigrant trope, which I don't know if you've read it, but it's an anthology edited by the Kassi, which puts together and commissions 21 essays by British other artists and celebrities in terms of writing their own stories about what it's like to try to be a good immigrant. And so we sort of pull these together. We also commissioned a photographer to go around and create portraits of people who worked in this field of working in terms of like whether you call it migrant experience, whether you call it, world cinema, which I know we shouldn't be using that word, but those kind of things, and then we try to speak to them in terms of getting their portrait done, and then they would talk about their own cinema experience, their love of cinema. There was one or two organisations that didn't want to be part of it because of the attachment to the BFI. So again, this sort of idea of decolonising and not wanting to participate in these ways we're not the most extreme example of it. It is interesting though because Tate's growth has come from a rejection of how things work and just wanting to do things on their own. And kind of going back to what you were saying about Julie and Isaac and Tate and everything, and just feel like where do you go? And actually, sometimes there is nowhere else to go because all roads do lead to the BFI. So even if you are rejecting institutions and any support and money, where do we go in terms of film exhibition? I also, going back to this sort of idea of, we did commission a video essay, which it's 12 minutes long. I'm not going to show you the whole thing. It's 12 minutes long. I think it's quite good. I think it's quite funny. And so there was still this element of having to teach and explain to people what it meant, but again, keeping in mind that we were doing it for our audience who understood what this was. But then it's always about the sort of experience and the reaction to what people are doing. People who know what it means will laugh. They think it's funny and they think it's a bit sort of terrible in terms of how funny it is. And then the people who will watch it and actually feel educated, which that's sort of a second intention. The second output is not really our intention. Just keep that in mind.
So, where are you from?
Where am I from? That's a big question, Where am I from? Where am I from?
Whether they ask you where you're from, or really from, or throw in the word originally just to mix things up, the answer will come in many forms. Depending on how much time you have, it can be utterly simplified or simply complicated, or it might catch in your throat and choke you as you try, once again, to assemble words for your response. So what is the right answer to this question? And how do we reconcile its posing with the way we see ourselves? Well, the reality of our experiences, as we know, is far more complicated than what meets the eye, and we are much more than just the sum of our parts.
I grew up in Shepherd's Bush.
Oh, I'm from Michigan.
I'm from Fresno, Ace.
British by way of Sri Lanka.
My mom is Dominican, Cuban, my dad is from Chile and PR, which means I'm Chile, Dominican. But I always say I'm from Queens.
This is ultimately what makes being of mixed heritage such a joyful, rich experience and identity to hold. Maybe there should be less asking and more listening to people's experiences, their grievances, their stories. More celebration of this reclamation of our identities through the art of these filmmakers and through living.
So, it got to the point. It got to the point where we just saw the things of migration and second heritage, or like second immigrant experience, mixed heritage everywhere. We cannot. I will find the details in every single thing in terms of thinking that everyone is from somewhere else. If you want to sort of listen to the playlist or watch the video, it's still on YouTube. Another thing that we sort of continue doing is because nothing we do is in isolation. We always collaborate, and we collaborate with people. So this is part of the thing that people do approach us in terms of doing outreach, which I know many people have different definitions of what that means. To us, it was to make time to speak to people and have conversations with community groups and organisations and seeing how they fit into what we're doing. So not so much about staying in that sort of cinema film UK bubble, but actually looking outside of it and thinking, all right, so we know this person's doing this, we know this person's doing that, or just finding out about it in terms of just sort of seeing how, just being aware of what's out there so that you're not doubling up, because this space is already difficult to navigate. We then don't also need to sort of compete with each other. So the second image is actually that after we did the BFI season, we then got funding from the BFI to go on tour with 23 short films. And this was the opening event, and it was quite an emotional event. It was quite emotional in the sense of this space was completely by people who, the space was taken over in a sense, and it was like audience members felt really comfortable to open up in terms of personal questions. And this is what happens when you have sort of a theme like this, because with the BFI season, we insisted that every feature film would have a short film introducing it. The reason is because who gets to make feature films? It's really hard to make feature films, and by the stage you're making a feature film, you already have so much input from random people. That's not enough to do a story anymore. Short films, on the other hand, anyone can pick up a camera and tell their own story. So one example is Asena, who's in the middle, who's she's got a film called Decolonising Trilogy, which follows her Turkish parents, telling their story in London. And she made it when she was like 17. So at this point, the film was made 5 years ago, and it was just a personal experience, personal exploration. She just wanted to interview them. And then all of a sudden, we had a call out that really was sort of wanted these films. Because another thing that is happening now is people submit their films to us and go, oh, could you let me know what you think? And the reality is, it just doesn't matter what I think. It truly does not matter what I think about a film. And the reality is that, it doesn't really matter what anyone thinks about a film, quality-wise. Mm-hmm. The way that we function is this saying something? What are the means in which this person made this film? Will it resonate with people? And is this person nice to work with? And I think that sort of protects us in terms of still the freedom we have in terms of how we work on films and curation. So short films is still a huge passion of ours. So the first image that we had is actually a short film that Angie produced called Minna, which is doing well at the moment at festivals. And again, it's this sort of staying true to what we said in terms of who's telling the story, what we wanted people to feel. It's been huge with the smaller community. People love it because it's not sort of filtered down, it's not trying to explain anything, it's just a lived experience that we're trying to sort of portray on screen. And this is an example of something that we know is out there, so something that might not be related to film necessarily, but Bumping Files is an organization that we work with, because we took these short films on tour, and we had a short film collection called Black Country, which is about the British Black experience outside of London, and it just made sense for us to collaborate with them in a sense of like, you're doing this work already, we're doing this work, how do we meet halfway, instead of trying to keep film to a film audience, when actually we're not trying to be like a generic or general cinema experience. It's not about new releases, it's not about sort of going to the movies, it's about, sort of selecting a few shorts that would work and trying to build a community around it. I don't know why people don't like short films. Anyone here doesn't like short films? Doesn't like short films? You don't like it?
No. It's very difficult to find.
We'll talk. I think it's difficult to find the screenings of, because we're actually working on a season now called Snapshot. And so it's 4 feature films, 3 are restorations, 4 paper restorations, archive films, and then the 5th program is a short film program, archive restorations, contemporary cinema, and no one wants to book it. So cinemas don't want to book it because they just don't understand what to do with shorts. But we continue, we try. So in terms of how we started with these sort of one-off grassroots screenings, we're now trying to address the issue at hand, which is why should the films that we're repping only be screened once and then disappear? And how do you provide space for people who cannot make a Tuesday evening or have childcare or can't get out of work, whatever it is? And this sort of idea of like, you get one slot, and if it doesn't sell out, you're not going to get another slot, is a serious problem. So, again, like, sort of going back to what I was saying in terms of the beginning, is that part of us need that we just need to go for distribution, we just need to distribute in the UK. But it took such a long time. No one was being transparent about how it works. And it seemed so complicated and it seemed so tricky because it's to do with money and stuff. It's actually not that hard. Yeah, it requires money and it requires knowing people, but it's actually quite straightforward. And I think it's really funny how it was made out to us that it was much harder than what it actually was. So again, so this season that we have, which is Snapshot, which I don't really know why I didn't include more of that, but we have a season called Snapshot, which people, so I'm being a bit difficult in the sense I'm asking cinemas to screen at least 3 times. And there's pushback on this. So cinemas are saying, we'll screen it once. I think we just disagree on what you can achieve and what it means, and like, what are you measuring it against? So it's the same thing with short films. To me, that's kind of no-brainer. You don't have to go through a distribution company and sale. You don't have to go through a sales agent. It's a fixed fee. People will come because they want to support emerging filmmakers. People will come because they want to meet filmmakers. What are you doing by saying no to that? And I think that's something that sort of is, yeah, that's sort of it feels to me that's something that we should have left behind pre-COVID in terms of this doesn't work. And what happens if we just work with things differently. So I'm being a bit stubborn and I'm saying we have to screen it 3 times because what chance does that film have if you're screening it 1 time? And you know, if people do want to see it but they also want to see something else, I can't be in control of what they're choosing in that moment. I have no control of ticket sales, I have no control of the cinema's marketing, for example. And also, what are the measures of people's idea of success? Is it sold out? Because I've sold out screenings and no one cares. So like, how are we measuring success? So this led to our first film that we distributed, which is called Set Maison. Has everyone seen Set Maison? We're new, we don't really know how to get out of people. But so the way it came to us was that it screened at Frames of Representation at the ICA. A friend of mine got in touch and said, I just saw the most beautiful film, take this to distribute it. And I said, we're not distributors. And then before I know what I was having a conversation with the sales agent who said, you can distribute it. And that was it. There's a little bit more into it, but that was literally it. It's sort of this idea of like attending festivals, attending these meetings, pitching, negotiating. I've been very fortunate to have removed myself from that scene, and I don't. Our rule is that we're never going to try to outbid anyone. If a film is great, as Set Maison is, and there's no distribution that feel that they know what to do with it, we'll have a conversation. But we're not going to outbid anyone. We're not going to try to get the best film, the biggest film, or anything. We're just trying to bring these could be cult classics to the big screen. Yes. And the reason being that everyone's struggling. Oh, 2 minutes. Okay, sorry. I know everyone's been really discreet when I get time. There's a reason to why it was this difficult, right? People want to stay in their jobs. That's totally fine. Also, I'm convinced that no one actually really knows what they're doing for that. And so they're just as they go along. And therefore, they can't say it to us. The only person that actually was transparent, I asked Delphine Liebens, who's an excellent distribution whiz, and I just said to her, how do I get the film on the actual calendar? Like, how do people know when it's coming out? And she just gave me the email, and that was it. Delphine now works with us. So, but no one else would really help us in terms of understanding how it worked. This is just to sort of show what could have been lost if it had been picked up for cinema, if it had been screened in cinemas. It ended up being on people's best film of 2022. Miriam Charles came, she's based in Montreal, she came to the UK, we then did a retrospective of shorts at London Short Film Festival. It's all about that's kind of, like I mentioned, the ownership of who can do what with this. And it makes me a little bit sad that we can't pick up all the films that have been lost. But this has been sort of a very long experience. And it just continues. So this was screened again at the Barbican last year, so a whole year and a half after it came out, we did the retrospectives. Okay, it was awful, and I think we're still playing with this idea of distribution versus seasons. So Snapshot is a regular season that we curated and stuff like that. That doesn't mean that we've left our roots behind of program screenings wherever we want to. And then only doing discretion is about being able to figure out and then we go on to our second title. And was it shopping? Shopping? Well, great. Job was great because it's just really joyful. And it's a lot more true than what we said. That's it.